The Galactic Empire had one of the greatest militaries that the galaxy had ever seen, and this was in no small part due to the huge amount of manpower at their disposal. Now, despite this, the Empire still fell, and it's pretty clear that nearly all of those loyal Imperials either surrendered, were killed in action, or deserted the Imperials. However, this seems pretty unusual. Normally for an autocratic regime as ideological as the Empire, its soldiers generally have to fight to the bitter end, and although this did happen in numerous cases, a lot of them simply abandoned the Empire and moved on. But why exactly is this? Now, first things first is that we need to understand that realistically for many soldiers it was a no-brainer. The Empire, following Palptine's death, was in chaos. Generally, soldiers were receiving contradictory orders and been sent on suicide missions, such as those involving Operation Cinder. Simply put, a lot of soldiers were more or less just abandoned by the Empire, not receiving any orders or just been told to commit unwinnable objectives. So naturally they decided, never mind that, we're leaving. You've got to admit, most soldiers, after they haven't received orders for months, are probably just going to assume that they're not needed anymore. Generally speaking, the New Republic wasn't too bothered about everyday Imperial staff or even Stormtroopers. They were more or less only after high command members of the Empire, the Moffs and the others that controlled this terror state, politicians, shady business associates. At the end of the day, they lacked the resources to track down and bring to justice the countless Imperial staff who were complicit in the Empire's crimes. I'm sure that there will have been a few that stood out, a few whose crimes were so terrible that they had to be brought to justice, such as Imperial assassins. But generally speaking, that would be a logistical nightmare to try to bring every single Imperial staff member who is even complicit in the Empire's crimes to justice. It just wouldn't work. We should also remember the fact that the Empire, particularly the ISB, will have undoubtedly moved to destroy majority of their records and information before the New Republic moved in. Stormtroopers in particular arguably didn't really have that much skin in the game in terms of accountability. We've mentioned before, Stormtroopers' armor was designed to give them anonymity, and this worked at the end of the day. With most their records been destroyed, they could simply take off the armor and more or less go back to everyday life. Sure, people could go ahead and say a certain Stormtrooper from a certain legion committed some sort of heinous act to them, their family, or their loved ones. And hey, you might even have that Stormtrooper's designation code, but realistically, aside from that, actually tracking down and identifying the individual behind the armor is more or less going to be impossible, especially without the records that were probably destroyed. But talking about motives for abandoning the Empire, we should also remember the fact that Stormtroopers were largely taken from poorer worlds. They often served as cannon fodder for the Empire's many wars, and for this reason, they were often picked from economically impoverished worlds with little to no opportunities or education available. Now, for this reason, it's very likely that a lot of the people who were Stormtroopers or everyday Imperial untrained staff were only really drawn to the Empire because it gave them the opportunity to get off their homeworld and be paid a wage. You gotta admit, if you lived on a world such as Tatooine or another uncharted Outer Rim world, the idea of going serving the Imperial military, living aboard a Star Destroyer, seeing the galaxy, getting training, and getting paid a wage, which I'm sure probably wasn't that much, but a wage is a wage, must have been a pretty enticing offer. Now, I find it very unlikely that as the war with the New Republic escalated and the Imperials were put on the back foot, everything turned pretty sour pretty quick. I can almost guarantee you that wages were quickly stalled, and the Stormtroopers and the other Imperial staff weren't getting paid anymore. The galaxy was in chaos, and it makes a lot of sense that they'd want to get out of there. After a few years of service, it was pretty abundantly clear that the Empire didn't care about them, so why should they risk their lives for its survival? We should also mention the fact that the Imperials were pretty poorly organised and lacked the rigid high command structure that they'd had beforehand. The Empire really did begin to just dissolve incredibly fast following Palptine's death. Now, for this reason, a small detachments of troops on a cruiser, or defending a small compound for example, there was a very good opportunity here to get out and take something to retire on. I think it's very likely detachments of troops will have simply commandeered as many valuable assets as they could. Blasters, vehicles, credits, artifact, all the things that the Empire needed to continue its fight. These troops could simply take, lose their armor, and go start of a new life. Happy, cozy retirement. And at the end of the day, there wasn't really anyone stopping them. It probably very quickly devolved into the rule of the strong, where people such as Stormtroopers were the ones who were trained to fight. They were trained how to use blasters, and for this reason, they could basically do what they wanted. If they decided they were leaving and they were stealing a vehicle and a bunch of supplies, no one was really gonna stand in between them. And hey, if your hard case officer says that you and your unit is needed, that you can't leave, that you're going to be redeployed to the fierce action against the New Republic, it's very likely that those Stormtroopers will have simply turned their blaster on their commander and left them in a shallow grave. The fact of the matter is, there just wasn't really any consequences for Imperial troops anymore. Mutiny under the Empire was treated incredibly harshly. You would have been hunted down, made an example of, and executed. However, now that the Empire was losing the war, this just doesn't happen. The Empire doesn't have the resources to go and track down its own soldiers. So, when tensions got high, the troops weren't getting paid, they were lacking orders, they were lacking purpose, if you will, then it's pretty easy to see how all of this just boiled over, and the troops ended up killing a few of their fellow Imperials, leaving and never to be seen again. And finally, and possibly the biggest reason Imperials were abandoning their posts, was because they didn't want to die, and that sounds incredibly obvious, I know. I don't even mean here in terms of them getting redeployed to go and fight the New Republic, who was gaining territory at a tenacious pace. But the Empire was doing a pretty good job at killing its own troops. Petty power plays and ludicrous contingency orders. Once word of this sort of activity got around, it's no secret that morale will have gone pretty low. We should also remember the fact that by the time the New Republic takes over the HoloNet, there's gonna be a lot more New Republic propaganda than Imperial propaganda, spreading words of all of the Empire's massive failures and shady dealings. Remember, it was loyal Imperial worlds that were the first to be purged by the Empire. And after hearing things such as this, it's very understandable to see why any Imperial with half a brain would maybe consider, I don't want to stay here anymore, I would rather get out and leave before I either get killed in a suicidal offensive, or some other Imperials simply choose to kill me because I'm not worth keeping around. But what do you guys think? Why did Imperials abandon their posts in droves towards the end of the war? And do you believe that this was a wise idea on their behalf? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, I really do hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please remember to like, share and sub, as it is really appreciated and it helps the channel grow. Also, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at TheLawGuy and tick the bell to get regular updates. But most importantly, thank you so much for watching this video today. I hope you all had a great day, hope you're all staying safe, and I'll see you next time.